problem was so easy to ignore for so long that by the time we'd noticed, it was far, far too late. We spend so much of each day in autopilot. Our lives are busy, we have so much to do, there's so much that we just ignore. It even has a name. It's called saccadic masking. It's where your brain is having to process so much of the world around you that it knows what information to throw away. We've all experienced it, whether it's driving to work or walking somewhere, you just go into this autopilot mode, arriving at your destination barely feeling like you'd left at all. Or you catch yourself in the middle of a task realizing that you had just carried on doing it without thinking. It's almost like you wake up all of a sudden. And that's exactly where they came from, those parts of the world around us that we just ignore, the corners of the park that are full of beer cans and carrier bags, or the underground stations that have a closed gate. They're covered in that black filth. The parts of the world that you just don't need to pay any attention to. And we didn't. That was the problem. We just pushed everything that we didn't want to the parts of the world that we couldn't see and didn't care about. It was just so situationist. It was the way the world was working. Everyone else was ignoring it, so each of us ignored it too. It felt like things were being done, and for the individual, it was out of our control. We had to just let it happen. But then the little interruptions started happening. The odd feelings. You know when you feel like you're being watched, but when you looked around, there was nothing out of the ordinary. The same old weird dark corners, the same bin bags, the same litter. But people started to realize, people started to know that something was going on, but no one could really figure out quite what it was. It was just a mutual feeling of unease almost across the whole globe. We knew that there was a problem. We knew that a bigger problem was coming, but we had no idea what to do. Well, then the reports of these creatures started coming in. Things we hadn't seen before. Not quite animals, but not animals. They could certainly move. They had hands and teeth and limbs, but they were all off. It was like they were copying something that they'd only had described to them. It was like lots of things coming together, an amalgam of the types of things around them. It was no singular thing. It was lots of things all coming together, almost recognizable, almost something that you could, figure out, that you could tell what it was, but there was something just so off about them. Of course, at first, everyone just ignored these reports. It was insane. It was far too foolish, far too strange. I mean, who had seen a creature like this before, other than those mad news stories that you see on a slow news day, reporting aliens or Bigfoot or Mothman. All of these sightings initially were just swept under the rug. Nothing really to worry about. Another boogeyman that would just turn out to be some hoax or overblown or not really worth thinking about. I mean, I don't think we really wanted to think about it either, but pretty soon we had to start thinking about it. Because the frequency of seeing these creatures, well, it grew, and well, the reports of the size of the creatures, well, that was growing as well. And people said that they had strange, covetous hands. They wanted to take things. They didn't just want to exist with us. They wanted things from us. These things were they were far too unsettling. Somewhere between living and dead. They were like everything that we'd left behind coming back to haunt us. They wanted to take things. They had these covetous little hands, people said. They were like raccoons. They could grab things and take them. But no one really knew quite what they wanted to take. There was no defined thing they wanted. They didn't always take things of value. One day it could be the cans out of your recycling, and the next it could be, jewellery that they'd found. There was no real way of telling, but people knew that if you left something alone for too long, eventually it would end up with them. Eventually they would take it. Even those who didn't believe in them had started to have things taken. We were told, officially, by the powers that be in an announcement that they didn't exist. That it was just a myth or a hoax, and that we could carry on with our daily lives, and as long as we didn't pay too much mind, then the whole thing would go away. It was just mass hysteria, and it would just blow over, and we could carry on with the status quo, and, well, we wouldn't have to worry. We could carry on with our daily lives, which we loved. We liked things being the same. We really, really didn't want to change. The unfortunate thing was this was the point that we really, really had to, and by the time we did change, well, they of course quickly went back on this advice. They had to acknowledge that they did in fact exist and that they had to do something about it. So we saw the introduction of special bins. Special bins that we could put our waste in, so that when it was taken away, it would be taken somewhere special, somewhere different from where most of the rubbish was going, where it could be processed in a way that these creatures, these ghosts of waste, couldn't come and take it. And you may ask, why didn't we want them to take it? Seems like a mutually beneficial agreement. We make the waste and then they take it away. Well, stories had started coming out. People had started noticing gatherings, you might say, in those little corners that we don't pay attention to. Those little grassy knolls where things get thrown by kids getting off the bus. Those little cracks between the skips in alleyways. Those festering places that we don't like to be. People were saying that the small little creatures with their little grabby hands, they were collecting things and taking them to those corners, and in those corners something larger was starting to prowl. No one could confirm it. It felt like every time it was investigated, we'd just find more and more piles of rubbish. But it was strange. People were saying that, they'd pull the bin out or the skip away from the wall, and then things would drop. Like being seen meant that it just lost life for a moment. I think people were worried that if they got big enough, well, they'd stop dropping when they were seen. So special bins it was. Problem solved, we thought. Take it out of sight, out of mind, process it, and bring it back to be used again. Simple. We felt like we had done all we could. We felt like we were doing a good job, and so we could just carry on as is. We were doing the right thing. We'd been told there was a solution and we were following it. We were part of it. And we felt good. We felt good that we'd solved this little issue and we could just carry on. But we could not carry on. Things had changed. Things were changing. And the solutions we had been told would work, well, they just didn't. Out of sight, out of mind. The inner cities and towns got cleaner. The creatures went away. Or at least, they went away from the inner cities and towns. The unfortunate thing was that these new places we had been told would solve the problem, process everything, and then send it back for reuse, well, they didn't quite work as expected. These creatures wanted to gather things together, and we had basically done half the job for them. These hulking, lumbering creatures started to rise from the landfill, both old and new. Difficult to tell which part was which, made from bottles and bags and discarded televisions. Almost anything could become a body part for them. All sort of clinging together, roped up with papier-mâché newspaper or old netting or plastic string. Even the netting from oranges could be used to hold them together. They were just so bizarre and intimidating, and we had no way of knowing what we had to do to get rid of them now. They were huge. They were so much bigger. Maybe the small ones we could have dealt with when they were small, but well, they were huge. What were we supposed to do? Not only were they huge, but I mean, they didn't have the space to stay far away anymore. They started coming back. They started invading our spaces again. Bigger and far more difficult to deal with, far more difficult to get rid of. Until there wasn't a corner of the planet where their repugnant influence couldn't be felt. They were huge and unstoppable and impenetrable, and they were growing. They had everything they needed. There was so much that they could pull from. We had done this. We had made these piles that they could be created from. We really had no one to blame but ourselves. And we just wanted our old lives back. We just didn't want things to change. We wanted it to stay the same, but it was never going to be the same. There was nothing we could do. A day came when news reports told us that in the Pacific Ocean, somewhere between Hawaii and California, some great thing was stirring. Some great leviathan rose from the deep. Eyewitness reports had said that it was this horrendous, strange thing that just rose from the water. Carrier bags, inflated and deflated like horrific lungs on this thing. It was alive. It could hurt us, but it was made of nothing. Nothing. Why couldn't we beat nothing? We had thrown these things away. They had no value to us, and yet they were our undoing. They were going to end us. Everything that we had discarded was coming back to haunt us. and there was nothing we could do. This thing apparently was stretching out these long tentacle arms and had connected everything together. It engulfed us. There was no way of getting rid of it now. The entire world was razed to the ground. It was just plastic, and the rain had turned to this chemical cocktail, and it was in our food. It was in our water. There was nowhere we could turn. Everything, life was just, it was just being choked out. It was just being choked out by this thing. It was far, far too late. But you want to know the funniest thing? We knew what this thing was. We knew where it was coming from. We knew what was fueling it. And the whole time this was going on, you could still buy bananas in plastic bags. It was far, far too late. The damage was done, and we'd done it to ourselves.